Welcome back to Legal Latitudes. I'm your host, Federico Lathrop, and today's guest is someone I've wanted to sit down with for a long time. Ted Wacker. He's a trial lawyer in Southern California with over 35 years of experience and more than 30 jury trials. Today, he brings us some of the most compelling case stories. We talk about growing up with a judge for a father and what an 8-year-old boy witnessed that never left him. We also get into the Vioxx litigation, where he cross-examined the defense's top cardiologist, walking out having dismantled Merck's entire expert case. We talk about his recent $30 million settlement in San Francisco, involving a brain-injured immigrant from Nepal. He was delivering food for Uber Eats. And this story shows exactly what it takes to fight a corporation that doesn't want to pay. We also talk about what Uber is quietly trying to do in California right now, and why every consumer in this state should be paying close attention. These are big cases, real stakes, real stories, and a guy who genuinely believes in what he does. Let's jump in. Ted Wacker, welcome to Legal Latitudes. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Ted, you're a successful lawyer. You have your own firm. We're actually recording here from your firm. And you've been doing very well for the past, 15, 20 years. Started at Casey Gary, right? But family-wise, your whole family practices law, right? Starting with your dad, that he was a judge.
Yes.
Right? How was to grow up with a father that was a judge in your house?
Yeah. Well, my dad, as many people, he's my hero. I looked up to him my whole life, and he was very respected and respectful man, and somebody that I admired growing up. And yeah, he was an attorney practicing. He followed his dad's footsteps. He grew up in New York.
Okay.
And went to Columbia undergrad, and then he came out to law school at University of Washington in Seattle, followed his brother out there, and then he became an attorney in downtown Seattle. And actually, when it comes to personal injury, he actually handled one of the largest personal injury cases back in like the early 70s. And at the time, I think it was 1972 or 73, it was the largest personal injury settlement in the city at that time, in the whole state, actually. Wow. And it was a lady that got her leg blown off, amputated in the Bastille's Day parade. They had an old-fashioned cannon on the back of this fire engine that the restaurateurs were having the parade, and somebody drank too much wine and lit this cannon off. It's supposed to be confetti that was supposed to go into the air and then come down over the crowd, like confetti. But the cannon was pointed down at the crowd, and when she was walking across, it hit her in the leg, and she had her leg amputated. So it was the largest settlement at the time. And but back in those days, in the 60s, 70s, attorneys hung their shingle, and they were solo practitioners, and they did everything, right. Criminal defense and wills and trusts, and he had that one personal injury case. But not long after that, he then ran for judge in our town. Basically, we lived in North Seattle, which is about maybe 20 minutes north of downtown Seattle. And so he became a judge at a very young age, at age like 38 or 39. And he was a judge.
At my age.
Yeah, at your age. He became a judge. And he did that because he wanted to spend more time with his kids, because practicing law, as you know, can be a lot of hours. And he really wanted to focus more on his family.
I see.
And spend time with kids and coaching us. And so I really respected that. But yeah, he became a judge, and he was a judge for 30 years in Shoreline, north of Seattle, until he passed away in 2003.
2003. Now, he was an inspiration for you, I'm sure, in becoming a lawyer, right? And he's also, you're saying, a very present dad. The case that you were talking before he went into the bench. I recall I was reading some information in preparation for this episode, and I saw there that there was some sort of toast. Were you present there?
Yes. So, and growing up,
Mm-hmm.
once the case settled, I was 8 years old. I
8.
forgot
Okay.
about it.
Okay.
Um, but I think part of the story is that that when the case settled, the
Mm.
lady that had her leg blown off hosted a celebration party for the settlement, and it was over on one of the islands. I can't remember if it was Bainbridge Island or Vashon Island up in Seattle,
Okay.
the San Juan Islands. And she was kind of a little bit of a hippie lady, and they lived in a commune. There was a bunch of couples that all lived together, and they kind of lived off the land. So they invited my parents over, and they cooked, on a wood burning fire stove and made spaghetti and had a glass of wine. And the lady, Miss Shelley, as I knew her, was toasting to my dad to say thank you for
Wow.
getting this big settlement that she could then live her life and get
Mm.
prosthetics for the rest of her life, that
Wow.
she could live a normal life. And so when she was giving that toast, she was in tears.
Right.
And so obviously that left a strong
Core
impression on me,
core memory, no?
very core memory. And, but I did forget about it
Mm-hmm.
for many years. And, people ask, did you want to become an attorney like your dad your whole life? And I was not one of those kids that wanted, I admired my dad, but I also saw in his judge's chambers these big, thick legal texts and books. And I thought, wow, that's a lot of,
Overwhelming,
it was
right?
overwhelming, especially as a young kid. As a young kid, all I really
Mm-hmm.
cared about was playing soccer and being a kid. And I
Right.
thought that was too much. And also going to law school, you're in college, law school for 7, 8 years. So I
Mm-hmm.
thought, wow, I'm not going to be able to do that. That's overwhelming. So it really wasn't until I got to undergrad and I realized my soccer playing days and my soccer career was probably not going to be a lifelong future for me that I really started thinking, what do I really want to do?
And by the way, we're gonna talk about your soccer days
Yeah.
because that's very interesting what you did there. You played in SDSU, right? And
Yes.
you had the 2 or 3 World Cup team members, right? So we'll talk a little bit about
Sure.
that. I find it pretty, I mean, very interesting. But yeah, so keep going. You were going to law school,
Oh,
following your
yes.
dad's
So,
footsteps.
yeah, eventually, I was a business major, think I wanted to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually I realized that that was not my cup of tea. And I really started then thinking about law school. And
Mm-hmm.
so, to follow my dad's footsteps, that's
Right.
what I knew. And I knew what he did. And I knew, the community admired him. So I thought, I want to do that. And of course, like many other kids growing up, I mean, I watched Perry Mason and a lot of these shows like that. And I wanted to be like that.
What about when your dad was coming back home and you were having dinners with him and with the rest of the family? Would he share things that happened, during his days, make you give your opinion, make you participate a little bit of things that were going on with his career, either as a lawyer or as a judge?
You know, I got to be honest, not a lot. I
Okay.
mean, uh, of course, the personal injury case I
Mm-hmm.
vividly remember because I was there.
Right.
But other than that, I mean, he did, you know, because as an attorney, they did a little bit of everything. I mean, I remember the things that stand out. I
Mm-hmm.
remember he was in the paper because he was representing a criminal defendant that was ultimately convicted of murder
Mm-hmm.
because he was guilty of murder,
Right.
and so my dad lost that case, and
Mm-hmm.
that defendant then attacked him in court and
Wow.
come and jumped him around the back, and then the bailiff came and tried to grab that
Wow.
defendant off him. And I guess the story was my dad flipped them both, because of the adrenaline.
The-
And it was sort of like, how did this attorney flip both the criminal defendant and the bailiff and get out? But I remember he came home with scratches on his
Wow.
face. I mean, little stories like that. But basically, he became a judge for me, at such a young age. I
Mm-hmm.
was about 8 years old. That those early years, I don't remember a lot of his attorney stories. I mean, his judge stories, he didn't really talk too much about it. I mean, we did have as kids, we would have the police come into our house quite often to, to get arrest warrants or
Right.
subpoenas. And so I remember that.
Okay.
And I remember these police officers who, as a young kid, I respected
Hmm.
the law. And I saw these men in uniform come to our house, and they were so respectful to him. And he would, sign the arrest warrant or subpoena, what have you.
I see.
So, but not a lot of other stories, to be
Okay.
honest.
So then fast forward, you end up going to SDSU, you play soccer, right, in college, and then you get accepted in USD, right? And you become a lawyer.
Yes.
I understand you worked first as a clerk for Casey Gary, a firm down in San Diego for the ones who don't know. And you were involved in a very famous litigation, Exxon Valdez, right?
Yes. And
Right,
so I
right.
started working at Casey Gary in 1989, and that's right when the Exxon Valdez oil spill um, case happened. And for those that don't know, maybe are a little bit younger, but in 1989, the Exxon Valdez oil spill case was um, a big tanker ship up in Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
The allegation was the captain of the tanker had been drinking,
Mm-hmm.
and he basically ran his tanker into an iceberg. Um, and unlike the Titanic that sank, it didn't sink, but it basically opened up the tanker and spilled millions of gallons of oil all throughout the bay up in
Wow.
Alaska. And so basically the case involved uh, the the economic damages, the lifetime damages of all the fishermen, some 30, 40,000 families, fishermen's families that lost their livelihood
Wow.
because all of the sea life was killed because of that Exxon Valdez oil spill case.
How many plaintiffs were involved in that litigation, if you recall?
It, if I'm not mistaken, it was 30 or 40,000.
Wow.
And so there was an attorney at Casey Gary that had some connection to Alaska,
Mm-hmm.
and so some of these families contacted her. Then she brought the case to Casey Gary, and at that time, Mr. Gary, Richard Gary, was the partner of Casey Gary, and he's the one that took on the case, and he was by this time in his 70s or late 60s, but he was just one of these
Mm-hmm.
amazing Renaissance men. He had just striking features, and just
Right.
he went to Colombia, and he had owned a cattle ranch in
Mm-hmm.
Brazil, and just an amazing person.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's the one that took that case to trial. Now the case went to trial,
Wow.
I think, in 1994, so 5 years later. And by this time, I had already graduated law school and moved on, so I wasn't even there when it went to trial, but it was
Right.
about a $5 billion verdict.
So, from a legal perspective, nowadays you have what everybody knows as mass torts, right? And there has
Yeah,
been an evolution of what mass torts used to be to what they are right now. You have the Bellwether case, right? And it's very rare that a mass tort that is that sounds so clear, like a
yeah.
straightforward case, would go to trial. But it sounds like back in the day that was not the case, right?
Well, yeah, I think mass torts was just sort of evolving. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
the other case that I worked on at Casey Gary was the asbestos
Right.
litigation. Now, I worked as a clerk um, with Tom Penfield, and we worked on the asbestos cases, just the property
Mm-hmm.
damage, the abatement cases, not
Right.
personal injury. That was handled separately, but the abatement cases for all the thousands of buildings that the city of and county of San Diego owned that had asbestos that needed to be abated. That
Mm-hmm.
cost hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions. And so there was lawsuits. We represented, Casey Gary represented the county and city of San Diego to sue these asbestos manufacturers. And it was extremely complicated because some of these manufacturers had gone bankrupt, some hadn't. But when you were asking what for those law students, what did I do? I mean, basically, I was on the front line, so to speak, of all of the asbestos manufacturers. And in San Diego, this was all of the biggest firms down there, Higgs Fletcher, and I can't even remember, Kaplan, some Seltzer Kaplan, a lot of the big firms. They were just constantly filing discovery motions and meet confers and demurs and
Mm-hmm.
motions to strike, motions for summary judgment. And I was handling all of that
So
for
you were
2 years.
doing lawyer work.
Oh yeah,
Mm.
I was doing at least drafting.
Right.
Of course, I can't claim
No,
that I
of
was
course.
doing
Hmm.
the lawyer work, but I was drafting all the oppositions to the oppositions to the demurs,
Right.
and giving them to the attorneys to
Hmm.
review. Obviously, I mean there was a lot of ex parte applications for different motions. I'll be honest, I didn't even know what an ex parte was
Right.
before I worked there. I had to go in and somebody said, "Here, draft this ex parte," and I had to go in and ask another attorney, "What does that mean? What does ex parte
It's
mean?"
crazy now that you mentioned
Yeah,
that, how little they teach practical stuff
yeah,
in law school
yeah.
in the US. I went to law school in Chile first, and
Mm.
then I came to the US, and I went to law school in LA. And I realized that it's so little what they teach you in terms of practical stuff. And we're gonna talk about your time at
Mm.
the Jerry Spence ranch,
Yes.
because that's exactly what they tried to do there, right? Teach you how to deal with trial work, and all of the seminars that we go nowadays, where
Yes.
we have run into each other, and the reason why we met,
Yes.
that's what they try to teach us, right? As lawyers, and you never stop learning. I mean, you're way more experienced than I am, and you still go to these conferences.
Yeah. Well, I have been practicing
Mhm.
over 35 years, and I had tried, as many as 30 cases, and
Right.
I was in a BOTA.
Mhm.
And so sort of like
What
why?
what I know it's pretty basic
Mm,
to know. I mean, every lawyer knows what a BOTA is, right? But why
yes.
don't you tell our listeners what a BOTA is?
So a BOTA stands for the American Board of Trial
Hmm.
Advocates, and it was founded in 1959,
Hmm.
and it was actually founded by Mark P. Robinson Sr.,
Hmm.
and he was one of the founding members up in Los Angeles.
Right.
Now it's nationwide, even international. But I actually worked for his son, Mark P. Robinson Jr.,
Wow.
who was famous for trying the very first Ford Pinto case. And then I ended up working for him as a partner for 12 years from 2000 to 2012. But a BOTA is basically an organization that's founded on preserving the right to jury trial, which is
Hmm.
protected by the Seventh Amendment.
Right.
And so that's one of the foundations of that organization. And it is for both plaintiffs and defense attorneys.
Hmm.
So it's a way for plaintiffs and defense attorneys to come together to protect the Seventh Amendment, the right to jury trial, and also promote civility within the
Right.
profession. This is a profession that becomes, some people say, is like
Hmm.
a little civil war, and it can be very acrimonious and adversarial. And I think a BOTA has a way of smoothing some of those issues out to be civil to each other, and that
Right.
we can still be adversaries, but still get along.
And it's not easy to be a part of a BOTA, right? You need to at least try what today they reduced the number, but I think it was 10, and now they reduced it to 5. I forgot the
Yeah, I think when I joined it was 20, and then they reduced it to 10,
10,
and I believe now it's 7. You have to have at
7.
least 7 jury trials as the first chair.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we talk a little bit about the trials that you have done, and you're just coming in hot with a very good result, right? Coming from San Francisco.
Yes.
But before we talk about that, I understand that you worked at Robinson Calcani, right?
Yes,
And you were involved in the Vioxx litigation, right?
that's right.
And you had the chance to depose a very well prepared cardiologist in that case, right?
Yes.
Now, for our listeners that are younger lawyers practicing law, what did you do to prepare to depose these guys that are usually the smartest in the room?
Well, yeah, so a little bit of a side story about working at Robinson Calcagni. When I left Casey Gary,
Hmm.
big plaintiffs firm, I wanted to work there right out of law school. But at that time, they were not hiring brand new green attorneys.
Hmm.
So basically, the idea was, no, we don't hire right out of law school. So, get your feet wet, get some experience. And back in that time in 1991, that was during the very first Gulf War.
Hmm.
And people thought this was going to turn into World War III. It didn't, but the war was over in 90 days. But it was, the economy went down, and so a lot of the job offers were pulled, et cetera. And so in any event, Casey Gary was not hiring, so they said, go get your feet wet. So I started out doing defense work. I didn't want to do that, to be honest, but I did because I needed to pay bills and I needed to get experience. And so I worked at two firms. I worked at Gilbert Kelly, Crowley and Jeanette, and then I worked at a med-mal defense firm, Carroll, Kelly and Trotter. But a friend of mine that I trained on the defense side, Carlos Prieto, who's was a very good friend of mine, worked for Mark Robinson. And when I was at Gilbert Kelly, we'd go to the partner's Christmas party at his house in Nellie Gale Ranch, and we'd all go with our ugly sweaters or what have you. And Carlos would always show up in a tuxedo. And we said, Carlos, why are you so dressed up? This is just a casual Christmas party. And he said, oh, no, because my his dad's an orthopedic surgeon, is friends with Mark Robinson. And so I'm going to the Mark Robinson Calcagna Christmas party after this. We said, oh, and I said, wait, Carlos, Mark Robinson, meaning the guy that tried the Ford Pinto case? He said, yeah. And I said, oh my God, when I was at Casey Gary in my third year of law school, Mark Robinson became of counsel at Casey Gary. They brought him down, and he was coming down there on Fridays to help them try cases. And so I met Mark back in my law school days. Now we're talking, 5 years later. And so he got a job there first. And then I was at Carroll Kelly. And so he kind of reintroduced me to Mark. And then it took Mark a couple years to finally pull the trigger and said, hey, Ted, would you like to come and do plaintiff's work? I said, yeah, that's my dream. I wanted to work at Casey Gary, but I also wanted to do plaintiffs, but I didn't want to do it anywhere. I wanted to do it, with the best. And so Mark Robinson in Orange County was kind of the best of the best. And so I started working there with Mark Robinson in 2000. And because I had done medical malpractice defense, that then lent itself to doing the pharmaceutical litigation. Right. And I did Breslin cases, and then we did the Vioxx case. And because I had come from that background, doing malpractice and working with experts, scientific experts, medical experts, Mark basically assigned me to do the depositions of the cardiologists in our case, the Barnett versus Merck case that went to trial in 2006. So when you were asking,
how do you prepare?
What did I do to prepare? And this, kind of took place in the defense training ground, but that a lot of these experts, it's hard to take on an expert on a subject that they know better than you.
Right.
You're the attorney. Yes, you can study. There's thousands of articles on Vioxx and the COX-2 inhibitor and the imbalance and prostacyclin, prostaglandin imbalance. I can know that with a general amount of knowledge, but I'm never going to probably know it as well as a doctor does. But I'm going to know the internal Merck documents better than they do because I've been studying them for 2 years, and there's thousands of those. So I'm going to know that better, that they're not going to know. And then, as we learn, as we get older, one of the best ways to cross-examine an expert is to attack their credibility. Right. And in this cardiologist that was out of Baylor University of Houston, Merck's cardiologist, I was preparing for 2 weeks, reviewing his report, reviewing his resume that they had produced. And I noticed some things, even in his resume, that seemed like red flags, warning bells were going off. Something didn't add up. And I noticed in his CV that he said he went to a Stanford-affiliated medical school. And I thought, I've seen that before. Because when I was doing defense work, I was cross-examining a plaintiff's expert who said he went to a Yale-affiliated medical school. And then when you take his deposition, you find out, Yale-affiliated means he went to New Haven School of Medicine, which isn't Yale at all. It's just, maybe they have some professors. Well, this guy did the same thing. He went to a medical school in San Jose that had some Stanford professors. So he put Stanford affiliated to boost up his resume. It was, you know, it was basically, it wasn't a lie, but it was embellishing.
Right, right.
And so that was at least one point that I found. The other thing that I found is it said in his CV that he was an invited speaker at a WHO, that's the World Health Organization medical conference, regarding this prostaglandin imbalance. But it was back when he was in medical school, and it just seems too suspicious. Why would they invite the WHO, the World Health Organization, invite a medical student to speak at their conference? I don't know, maybe he had some special, unique research, but it didn't make sense. And so, I started Googling.
Right. It smelled weird.
It didn't make the smell test.
Yeah.
And I started Googling, WHO medical conference in whatever year it was, 1990 or 1986 or whatever year it was. And I found out that the medical conference that he says he attended in Basel, Switzerland, the same year that he says he was there, I found the medical conference and it was in Moscow, Russia. And it made no sense. And so then I find in the Moscow, Russia medical conference that the person that was the moderator of that panel on prostaglandin was a professor of medicine in Madrid, Spain. And I thought, I'm a young attorney. I'm just going to find this professor, unusual name. I found her on Google, and I found her at the University of Madrid. And I thought, I'm just going to email her. So I emailed her. I said, hey, I understand you were the director of this conference, WHO conference. I said, did this guy ever speak? This expert? And she said, no, I don't know who that is. I said, okay, well, so I don't have to, I'm involved in this case. I don't want to have to bother you anymore. Kind of Columbo, like, I don't want to bother you. Can I just send you this declaration? So I sent her the declaration.
I don't want to bring you to the United States to testify, right?
Exactly. So I just said, can you just sign this declaration that you don't know who this doctor is, never invited him to the food conference. So I had that declaration signed in the 2 weeks preparation. So I had it kind of in my quiver of arsenal. I never had to use it.
That's great for impeachment.
Yeah, because I spent the first 3 hours of that deposition just cross-examining him about his CV. I didn't even get into his Rule 26 report because I knew he's going to know that.
Right.
I'm not going to take him on that. I'm going to beat him where they're not looking.
Yeah.
And so we took a break for lunch, and the attorney at Fulbright Jaworski says, I talked to Phil Beck, who was the lead trial counsel, and he said, yeah, we're gonna withdraw this expert. So they didn't even call him. They withdrew him right after, before we even got into his opinions, right at the lunch break. They never used him again.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now, Mark Robinson was involved in that case as well, or
yeah,
you were?
No,
Okay.
he was the lead trial counsel.
Yeah.
So I was working for Mark Robinson, and
Okay.
Mark, this was a bellwether Vioxx trial. We were the second trial to be tried, bellwether case in federal court in New Orleans. There was a previous trial that was handled by Beasley Allen, but I think there was a motion for a new trial. It was granted, so we were really the first bellwether case.
Okay.
And we had done, I think, as many as 5 focus groups, some in Los Angeles, some in New Orleans, to get ready. And kind of a little bit of a funny story on that. We were trying different closings to see what would appeal to a jury. We just wanted to win. And there was at least one focus group where we thought, let's just go in and ask for something small just to see if we don't offend them, that they'll give us a victory, because we just wanted a win for the plaintiffs. And so in that practice focus group, Mark asked the jury to award our guy just $250,000 for his heart attack. And what we found in that focus group was that when he only asked for $250,000, which was totally reasonable, but even less than reasonable, the jurors wondered, like, why is Mr. Robinson only asking for this amount of money when this guy had these heart attacks?
Right.
He should be asking for more money. So he must think there's something wrong with his case that we don't know about. He's not telling us what's wrong with this case. So we realized that sometimes being too reasonable, that they think that there's something wrong. So in the end, we went to trial, and Mark did the closing. And in that closing, he, no offense to Mark, but he violated every rule that any plaintiff's attorney ever learns about trying a case. And every trial school you go to says you got to give the jury the amount, like what you're asking for, otherwise they're not going to know. And Mark didn't do that. He just said, I want you to give, very humble way, as he does. I'd like you to just give Mr. Barnett whatever you think is fair and reasonable, and then sat down. And what they thought was fair and reasonable was $51 million.
Wow. What year was this?
That was 2006.
Okay.
2006.
Wow. That's a great
yeah,
result.
Yeah, that case was sort of a dream for me to learn doing the experts. But we also, since it was a bellwether case, we had jury selection. We had a peanut gallery jury, meaning a mirror jury. So for every one of the 8 jurors in federal court, we had, if there was a 57-year-old white guy, engineer from this parish, our consulting firm found a 57-year-old, white male from that parish that was kind of like, there was a mirror, and they just sat in the courtroom. And every night after trial, this decision quest would get a feedback from them about how the trial is going, what can we do to improve. And so we were learning every day what we needed to do for the next day.
What an awesome experience.
Amazing experience.
And as a context note, the Vioxx case involved this pain medication drug, right?
Yes.
I think it was very famous in the United States, but interestingly enough, we have listeners from all over the world.
Yes.
And some from Chile, from my home country. So I'm going to try to give a little bit of context about what this drug did. My understanding is it was a pain medication that didn't have the side effects that ibuprofen and other pain medications have in terms of your gut, your stomach. But later on, it was found that it caused cardiac problems, right? And some people were having heart attacks because of it.
So they call it it was in the class of drugs called COX-2 inhibitors. And the COX-2 inhibitor, the reason the research was done is because many people that take NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications like ibuprofen or what have you, they take these medications, they get GI upset, or maybe they get even ulcers. So this was a drug that was made to prevent the GI problems.
Right.
So that was the benefit of the drug. It's like a yin and a yang. Sometimes the drug has a benefit, but it also has a counterbalancing side effect. And in this case, the benefit was to eliminate the GI problems, but in this case, the problem was that it was causing basically increased atherosclerotic disease because it increased the plaque in your arteries. That's one mechanism. And then it also caused platelet aggregation. So if you increase atherosclerosis in the arteries and you have platelet aggregation, then that's a recipe for disaster for heart attacks and strokes. So there was some 40,000 people in the United States who were part of this. They don't call it a class action, but it's called a coordinated action in the MDL in New Orleans that ultimately the next year in 2007 settled for $4.6 billion. But you're right. Many countries saw the risk benefit profile, they call it, and many countries would not allow it. Because of that, they saw that the increased risk, and Merck did a great job of touting the benefits and making
the cardiologist. That's Merck.
Yes, they made it sound like it was this wonder drug, like this wonder aspirin, when really it was no more beneficial to you than a Advil in terms of pain. It did have a benefit for the GI, but that was only a small percentage of the population that even had that problem. So when you look at the risk benefit, it just didn't make sense, and ultimately that's why Merck pulled it off the market, and the FDA made them in 2004.
Okay, that's awesome. Now, Ted, you now have your own firm, right? From Robinson Calcagne. When did you start your own firm?
So I started this firm, my own firm, TBW Law, in August of 2014. So we're coming up a little shy of 12 years.
Okay. And you've been very successful. And are you still taking mass tort cases, or you're focusing specifically on single plaintiff cases?
No, our focus is on the individual catastrophic cases. Um, we are involved in some of the mass torts, like the Camp Lejeune water contamination cases and the hair relaxer cancer cases, but predominantly we leave those to the big mass tort firms. That's kind of a specialty. To be honest, after the Vioxx trial in 2006, I made a decision for myself and my family and my life that I really wanted to focus on the individual cases for a number of reasons. One, doing the mass torch, you're traveling all over the country and all over the world, and I had young kids that were getting to the age that I wanted to coach their baseball and soccer, so I wanted to be closer to home. And when you're doing the mass torch, some people say it's kind of an octopus without a head. It's just so unwieldy, and it's hard to really get into the individual client story of every single client. And you can do that with individual cases. So in 2007, I kind of moved on from the mass tort world, and I started focusing on the individual cases at the firm at Robinson. And I had, two big verdicts back then in 2010. One was a morphine overdose case that resulted in an anoxic brain injury in Orange County. That was a 2-month-long trial. And then another one in Compton up in LA that we tried. It was the guy had basically became a paraplegic. It was a burst fracture of his T12 spine and became a paraplegic, and it was a bad faith open policy case, but we got a $14.6 million verdict in that.
Very good. What you just said about focusing on the human story, and the problems or struggles in doing that when it's a mass tort case. There are so many plaintiffs, right?
Yes.
For me, that I resonate with that, because I started working in wildfire cases. That was the first job that I had as a plaintiff lawyer, and it's very fulfilling, because you're of course giving back to people who lost everything in the fires. We were handling the North Bay fires, the Camp Fire, very devastating wildfires that are they're handled in a way that it's in a joinder fashion, not mass tort itself, but that happens. The lack of focus on the human story. You cannot spend time with the families like you do with your single plaintiff cases, right?
Yeah.
Now, today, last week you're coming out of a very good result against a big corporation in San Francisco, right? It involved an Uber.
Yeah. So in that case, we represented a gentleman from Nepal that had come here on political asylum from Nepal because he was married and kids there and was working in Nepal, but the communist government from China was corrupt, and they would basically steal from him, from his business. Every month they would come and say, here, you got to pay us. You got to pay us. So it was a very corrupt system, and he just couldn't support his family under those circumstances. So he made the difficult decision to leave his wife and 2 teenage kids to come to the United States under political asylum. It took him a year to get here through walking roads and trucks and hitchhiking through India and Brazil and Central America. And so he made it. And so finally he gets here. He gets his work permit, and he's working for Uber Eats, delivering food in downtown San Francisco. When he was coming up a hill down, San Francisco has steep hills, and this other driver was coming down the hill, and the other driver made a left turn into him at an intersection where it says no left turn, 3 signs. And the other driver working for this company wasn't paying attention. His app said make the left turn, but the signs all said you can't. And so he hit this our client, and our client flew off his motor scooter, suffered a head injury, suffered multiple rib fractures, internal bleeding, to the point where they had to open him up. When he got to the hospital, they thought he was going to die of blood loss, but they removed 12 inches of his colon. But that one of the complicating factors of his all the blood in his abdominal cavity was that he was at risk for blood clots, and so they were trying to everything they could to prevent them. But ultimately, he had blood clots to his brain, so he suffered embolic brain strokes. Yeah, and so he was, brain injured for life, and he had recovered to the point where he can walk and talk and, arguably even drive at times. And, of course, the defense was he was perfectly fine and
Right.
he could do anything. And obviously he couldn't. He still can't. And he'll be injured for the rest of his life and really he'll need somebody to be there with him, to
Right.
monitor him, to make sure he's safe. So, and you can't really put that on the family. So he needed a life care plan. And so ultimately we were able to resolve that case for 30 million.
30 million. And you guys started trial, right?
Yes.
You work with two other lawyers. Was it your brother and Joey Lowe?
Yes. So my brother
Mhm.
also works with me at the firm, and he practices out of Seattle, Washington, where we grew up, where our
Okay.
dad was a judge. So he moved up there, and he's licensed up there. But he works on some of our bigger cases down here. So he was appearing pro hac vice in this case, and then we both attended the Jerry Spence trial school, the Jerry Spence method in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. That's probably one of the most famous trial schools in the world. And Joey Lowe has been the director of that trial school ever since Jerry Spence retired, and he was kind of hand selected by Jerry Spence to take over. So he's Jerry Spence's protege, and for people that don't know, Jerry Spence is probably the most famous trial attorney in the world,
Right.
and has had some of the most amazing verdicts. I think the story is that he never lost a case, and he's written books, and he has this ranch out in Wyoming for a trial school to teach attorneys how to try cases from start to finish. And so Joey Lowe is the one that heads all of the instructors at that. So we brought him in for this catastrophic brain injury case.
So lawyers go up there to the ranch with loafers and a jacket, and they come back with cowboy boots and hat, right?
Yeah, they come back with cowboy boot, and in my case, I was feeling pretty cowboyish, and I think I came back with about 5 cowboy hats. So I was feeling good.
So before I want to ask you a little bit about that experience, at the ranch and how it was for you. I have not gone to the ranch. It intrigues me, going there. I can see from afar that there is a before and after for lawyers going there, and I can see that the biggest representation of that before and after is Joey Lowe. He in a way speaks and he projects this ranch energy that is very compelling, very persuasive. He's very successful, right? How was to work with Joey Lowe in this case and other cases if you have worked with him before?
Yeah, so, well, I think the thing that you can say about Joey Lowe and the ranch is it makes that trial attorney and we can even get rid of the word attorney, and it turns this human being into this attorney into a human being. So you're just a human being. You're just trying to be as real and authentic as you can. And Joey Lowe is that real, authentic person. And that's exactly who Jerry Spence was a real, authentic cowboy. That's who he is. And that's who people on juries relate to. They relate to real, authentic people that are telling somebody's story, that are passionate about it, that you can tell are genuine, and just be yourself. And you learn a lot about that at the ranch. But that was Jerry Spence's mantra, is just to tell the story, be open and honest to the jury. And if you're open and honest to them, they're going to be open and honest to you.
Right.
And so, people say that the Jerry Spence trial school is life-changing. And I went at my age, you can see all the gray hair. I just turned 61 and I just went a few years ago.
For the
And
first time?
for the first time.
Mhm.
And yes, I'd been to some of their weekend classes or seminars. But of course, I wish I would have went 30 years ago when I
Okay.
was younger, but I didn't. So, everybody has their own
Timing.
journey in life,
Mhm.
and that was mine. And I was one of the older students, I
Mhm.
have to say, but I wouldn't change it. It was transformational, even for me at my age. And a lot of that is, I mean, part of the program is to learn to be in touch with yourself, because if you know who you are,
Right.
you find out who you are as a person. You really dig deep, and it's very almost in-depth, psychological, because we do a lot of psychodrama. And when you learn who you are, and we're human beings. We all have frailties. We all have
Close.
weaknesses,
Mhm.
flaws, but you have to embrace all of those
Right.
and learn who you are. And then when you do that, then you're not fearful of presenting yourself to that jury, because you've learned to accept who you are. And then you can embrace your client, you can learn your client's story,
Mhm.
and you can embrace all their flaws and be open and honest to the jury about that. And there's
Right.
there's no other program in this country,
Mhm.
in this world, that offers that.
Since I became a lawyer, I've been listening about the Jerry Spence method, the trial lawyers college before, right? They went different ways, but it's pretty much the same thing that ended up parting ways.
Yes.
And one of the things that I've been listening to is the biggest or best way to persuade someone is to be able to step in that person's shoes and be able to see it the way they see it. And once you're able to feel and live and perceive
Yeah.
ways that this person perceive, you're able to really speak their language and convince them, and that's where it starts, right? So, and I think the process, because I've done one of those a few of those weekend workshops with TLC, and they do this psychodrama. Is that
Yes.
what they do also
Yes.
at Jerry Spence method? Part of the process is knowing first yourself, and then you get to know the other person, right?
Yes.
That's like
That's a big part of it. Yeah, and you know, at this trial school, first of all, you're out there with no cell service,
right.
um, at a ranch in Wyoming, and it's beautiful country and it's peaceful.
Mhm.
So it's kind of relaxing, meditative,
Mhm.
and you're able there to work. And it's not just, you go to conferences, you watch other people speak.
Mhm.
That's helpful, but there's nothing like doing,
Standing up,
practicing.
right?
And when you practice yourself, you learn what you're good at and what you're not, what you need help on. And kind of to your point, to stand in somebody else's shoes. I mean, one of the cases I practice on was our case we have coming up for trial, hopefully this year. We don't have a trial date yet, but we have a wrongful death case against Uber.
And I want to talk about that for
Yeah,
sure, and I also want to talk about the Uber situation in California,
sure.
if we can for a little bit.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
this case, one of the things they talk about at the trial school is use
Mhm.
it as a lab, use it as a place. Anything goes.
Mhm.
So just feel safe that you can try anything. And so, in that case, at the end, one of the things that we had to do was you don't have time to put on a whole trial, of course, but there's other students. So, maybe it was a 15 or 20-minute closing. And, part of the method is to be real and genuine. And rather than stand up there as a stiff
Mhm.
attorney at a podium with a notebook, black notebook, which is really what defense attorneys do, and just kind of read a script, which is boring and doesn't engage the jury, is to get real with them. And so I started out as the attorney speaking, on behalf of the heirs of Sylvia Velasco, who's, died in this, horrible, tragic accident by this the hands of this Uber driver who was
With 2 priors and a
he was
probation
drunk.
ongoing.
He was drunk. He was on whippets. He had 2 prior DUIs. And so I, gestured that this is the family member that you heard from, the father, the 4 kids, the grandson, the mother. And you heard from them in this trial.
Mhm.
And you all heard the loss from them. But I said, the one person you haven't heard from in this whole trial is Sylvia Velasco. And so then I sat down in a chair and I became Sylvia Velasco, speaking to the jury as the person that died and how much her loss impacted her family and how much her loss impacted all the things that she did. And so don't take away from them, my family, what happened to me. And so it was, I would have never done that in any other setting, to speak on behalf of a deceased person. I'm not saying that I would necessarily do that, but I tried it.
But at least you did it. You tried it. It's like
it was emotional. I mean, I was doing this in tears, and my fellow jurors were my other attorney friends, and they were in tears, and my instructor was, in tears. So it was very impactful and something that I'll never forget. And I wouldn't have tried that but for that being at Jerry Smith's.
Yeah, that must be so emotional.
Yeah.
I mean, oh, wow. Now, going back to your settlement of last week, you guys got a $30 million settlement right after jury selection. People sometimes wonder, why so much money? What do you pay with $30 million for a TBI victim? And how detrimental is a TBI injury to someone? It messes up with your soul, I like to say, right? When you have an injury to your spine or to your arms or legs, it's different. It's just simply different.
Well, yeah. So just to be clear, I mean, TBI is a term, traumatic brain injury.
Right.
And in a way, this really wasn't a TBI per se. This was just a frank brain injury because he had embolic strokes. So, some people get confused about between just a brain injury and a traumatic brain injury. Traumatic brain injury is from the trauma.
Right.
So
what's the cause of the injury? But by the end of the day, the symptoms
are the same. Exactly. So, but why $30 million? Well, this is a man that came here on political asylum to come to basically leave everything behind to support his family. And now he'll never really be able to work again.
Right.
And so you talk about lifetime earnings. He will never be able to be left alone again. Yes, there's periods of time for an hour or half an hour that you might be able to not stand there with him. But on a 24/7 basis, with his level of brain injury, can you feel comfortable that he could just live in his own apartment? No, it's like he became a child. Right. He needs support. He needs somebody there to monitor him. Similar to like an Alzheimer's patient, where you just can't leave them alone. So part of the cost of the $30 million is that lifetime care from 38 till his life expectancy at 86. And so what is that all worth to have somebody there? And the life care planner looked at 2 different options. One is if we put him in a facility, how much does that cost? Right. Or if he lives in his own home and we bring somebody in from the outside to help watch him, how much does that cost? And I actually found it kind of strange that it's actually more to bring in somebody private to your own home than actually to go live somewhere. But it's also better for him, right? If you're 38, do you want to go live in a senior center home with a bunch of other, brain injured victims or Alzheimer's patients? No, you want to live with your family.
And we're also using money in a way of justice, right? And justice is not perfect. Money is not gonna, take us back in time and make like this never happened, but at least helps. And a victim of any type of injury should be entitled to the best care available, and not only today, but in 30, 40 years more.
That's right.
Right. Now going to your current case, the Velasco
Yes.
versus Uber case. I think it's I want to make a pause here and address a little bit what's going on in general with Uber, because your case is a clear example of what Uber did wrong in terms of not preventing that a unprepared, negligent, and a felon type of driver um, just go around driving Uber for Uber, right? Getting paid. Uber is getting paid at the same time, and then as a result, they don't make a background check, right? To check on these drivers, and as a result, 2 people died, right?
Yes. So it's, the Velasco case, we represent Sylvia Velasco and her family, which is her husband and 4 adult children, her mother that she supported, and her grandson that he lived with them. In addition, we represent the estate, and as you know, the estate can now sue for the pain and suffering post-accident but pre-death. And
Right.
the evidence was that she lived those last 12 minutes of her life were on the side of the road in pain and fighting for her life. So that has value. So those are the 8 plaintiffs, and we have a claim for punitive damages against Uber.
So one person died, was involved in the collision.
Our client was a passenger in a coworker's car. The
Perfect.
coworker also died.
Okay.
She died.
Okay.
But
Okay.
she was a passenger.
Okay, you're not representing the coworker.
No, the coworker's case was represented by somebody else, and they're out of the case.
Okay.
So it's just us representing the estate of Sylvia Velasco for her family
Got it.
against Uber.
Mhm.
And yeah, so the driver was convicted, and he had pled guilty to felony DUI. So he's in jail for life, and with no opportunity for parole, because
Right.
this was his third DUI.
Third DUI.
And also he was, and he admitted to being double the legal limit in his plea agreement. He admitted to being in the course and scope of work for Uber at the time. Uber fights that because they're
Right.
like, oh, you weren't in the
Proposition
course.
22.
You weren't in the course and scope of employment because you weren't an employee. You were
Right.
an independent contractor. So Uber filed that motions for summary judgment under Prop 22, claiming that we can't be liable as a company because he wasn't our employee. He was an independent contractor, and we're not. We don't even employ drivers. We're just a tech company. We don't even offer food deliveries. That's done by the driver. They're the ones that have the agreement with the customer. I mean, it's kind of bizarre how they argue that, but obviously there's a number of bases for holding Uber vicariously liable that are
Right.
just beyond calling him an employee. So even if he's an independent contractor, he can still be their agent.
Right.
And then you look into the Supreme Court case, the Borello factors, and find out how much control they have. And we obviously were able to convince them that we were going to win that motion for summary judgment. And so when we were waiting for their reply brief on the motion for summary judgment on Prop 22, in their reply brief, they waved the white flag and just withdrew their motion. So I think we were the only firm in the state that actually got Uber to actually withdraw their motion for summary judgment without even hearing it. There has been a mixed bag of rulings on the motion for summary judgment from different rideshare companies and different judges. And so that's still an ongoing fight and battle, but I just know 100% that we are in the right, that they are vicariously liable.
Now, why don't you tell the Uber riders, right, and Uber drivers out there what Uber is doing now in California, and how is this affecting the consumer in general? Because we're going, all the plaintiff lawyers, right, are all together fighting this proposition, this ballot that they are
Yes.
trying to submit for voting, and it's very detrimental to consumers, right?
Yeah, so Uber, as anybody that's in this industry knows, has spent hundreds of millions of dollars to prepare an initiative, a proposition to get the voters to pass a law that would basically limit anybody's rights
Right.
in many different ways. And so the law is that they proposed is to basically limit how much an individual consumer can recover in both medical and attorney's fees and costs to 25%.
Right.
And they do it under the guise of, well, isn't this great for the consumer? Because now they're going to get 75% out of every dollar. And so on its face, oh, geez, that sounds amazing. Now the consumer is going to be protected. The problem with that is that now you got to fit in medical expenses, attorney's fees, and costs into 25%.
Right.
And it's just not possible to do. It's trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. You just can't do it. And basically, by passing this law, it would eliminate any consumer's ability to ever take on Uber or any other case for personal injury. You
Right.
just wouldn't be able to do it in California. So it would be a catastrophic blow to all consumers
Right.
in the state of California if this law were to pass.
That's one of the things that really makes me feel fulfilled as a lawyer, which is the fact that I don't need to charge my clients for my time and they don't pay me. It's the other side, the one who pays for your fees, attorney fees, right? But what Uber is doing is limiting this, making the business for everybody a bad business by the end of the day. So now suing Uber or suing any, representing a victim of car crash, if this initiative gets approved, voted and approved, will limit the lawsuits, the ability of consumers to file lawsuits, and then as a result, they're going to be unprotected, right?
It completely eliminates any potential fight that you would have. And I mean fight, I mean any leverage that you would have to make it impossible to wage this war.
Right.
So you really couldn't do it. In the case that we just settled for the $30 million,
I was going to go there. Yeah.
they were fighting us on every single angle with
Right.
experts to say that our guy was fine. So we had to hire
Life care
neurologists, neuropsychologists, neuro-ophthalmologist, ENT, orthopedic surgeons, all of these experts. And then they were fighting us on liability too.
Right.
So we had to hire accident reconstructionists, motorcycle experts, human factors experts. And then we had to show the jury what the injuries were. So we had, DK Global prepared 9 different animations. All of this costs money. So we had to invest over $2.5 million to put that case on for trial. Now, if this Uber initiative passed, there's no attorney on this planet, including myself, that could ever afford to put up $2.5 million when you can only recover 25%.
Right.
And so they know this. So you would never see a result like this to get benefits for a consumer. I mean, every case would just either not be pursued,
Right.
or somebody would get a penny on the dollar. And Uber knows this.
Right.
And all the other insurance industry knows this. And, of course, they're hoping this passes because it saves them hundreds of billions of dollars.
Lawsuits. Right.
Yeah.
Because they are not doing the right thing.
That's
By the
right.
end of the day, what they should do is, in your case, your current case, what they should have done is just a simple background check, and this guy shouldn't be out there driving for Uber, killing people, right?
Yeah, it's any other industry. If you work for a taxi company, if you work for any commercial driver, they're going to do a standard 10-year background check because 10 years is what is on your DMV record.
Right.
In our case, they only look back 7 years and not the full 10 years. And Uber does this saying, oh, well, we hired Checker, a background check company, to do the background check. So they pass the buck to Checker. Then Checker comes in and says, oh, well, we're a background check company. We're called a consumer reporting agency, and we're limited to only looking back and reporting 7 years. So we can't report back beyond 7 years. So the problem with that is that as I questioned their witness in deposition, I used the analogy of a mirror. Like when you see in your side mirror, you see cars in the other lane, but what do they tell you in DMV? You got to look over your right shoulder to look in your blind spot,
Right.
right? And so Uber didn't look in their blind spot, and they're a rideshare company because they have this big blind spot in their mirror, which is anything beyond 7 years, 7 to 10 years, they're not looking. And so here's a guy that any other industry would look and see he had 2 prior DUIs 9 and 10 years ago, and they're not looking. They didn't look. They didn't want to know. They covered their eyes.
Right.
You know, it's like this: see no evil, hear no evil. They didn't look.
Right. It's a tech company growing faster than their safety systems.
That's it.
Basically.
And, let's be honest, like we always say in all these cases, follow the money.
Right.
And the follow the money is they hired Checker to do these background checks, and they wanted them to be done as quickly and efficiently and limit the cost as much as possible because they're doing background checks on thousands, if not millions of drivers around the country. And if they would have had to do a real background check and look back 7 years and pull some of these DMV, it would have cost them more money that every other industry is doing. But they don't do it because they can pay Checker to do it and just do it online and simple and easy and cost, cheap. Yeah.
Now, you have a daughter, right?
I do.
And she's a lawyer as well.
Yes, my daughter Kelly, smartest one in the family, much smarter than myself. My younger brother, we were both attorneys. Our dad was an attorney. My grandfather was an attorney back in New York. But by far, my daughter is the smartest. She graduated from Boston College, cum laude. She graduated from University of San Diego, where I went. My brother went, summa cum laude. So she's in the top, whatever that is, 1% of her graduating class. And so I can say super proud dad.
And she's following your footsteps because she works for Casey Gary now, right?
Yes. So she is now a first-year attorney at Casey Gary, which full circle is the same firm that I clerked for 35 years ago. And she's now working with one of their head trial attorney, Robert Francavilla.
I know Robert.
And Robert Francavilla, when I was a law student, when I was 23, 24, he was kind of the up and coming trial attorney at the firm. That was 35 years ago. So now he's been practicing 35 years too. And he's now I believe their number one trial attorney. And so she has the fortunate opportunity to work for really one of the best trial attorneys in San Diego. And that's awesome. Robert Francavilla.
I'm sure she's going to be a rock star very soon, right?
I hope so. I mean, I think so. I think she's on her way. She's at the right place.
Right.
And so I guess she has it in her genes a little bit too.
That's awesome. Proud dad, and I'm glad. Now, you went to DSU, right?
Yeah.
And we touched a little bit on this at the beginning of the episode. You were playing soccer, right?
Yeah, I grew up playing soccer. Now, I was born in the 60s, and soccer in the United States when I was a young boy, starting out at age 6, was not a sport that anybody knew about. My parents didn't know about it, but I made a right turn at that point and decided I'm going to go to law school and follow my dad's footsteps to University of San Diego.
I see. Now, knowing what you know and living what you lived, would you say the United States right now is passing through its peak in terms of soccer? Or you've seen soccer more popular in other times throughout your life?
No, I mean, I think from the time I was 6 years old, I think every year it's grown. It's evolved. It's gotten more and more. Of course, we now have more pro teams than ever before. We have now more players playing in Europe or around the world than ever before. We had none of that. So even in the old NSL, the American players were kind of token players on each team. I think they had to have each team had to have like at least two. It was kind of like a, sort of a charity. Like here we got to draft 2 Americans, but now there's plenty of Americans playing. So it has evolved. I think it's gone through sort of fits and starts where it's like seems like it's getting better, and then it kind of plateaus a little bit, and well, we'll see what happens at this World Cup.
Right.
I mean,
are you going?
I'd like to, but I see these ticket prices and I say, for that price, I could fly over to a pub in Dublin, Ireland, and go watch the game there for the same amount of price as a World Cup
That's
ticket.
true.
But I'm sure I will find a way to go to a game.
Awesome. Well, Ted, I think we're going to an end. I want to finish this with a question, which is after 30 years of doing this, right? You've been 30 plus years,
35. Yeah.
35, and several verdicts. I'm sure you have some losses like everybody else as well. What makes you want to do this over and over again? What is it that calls you? What's your passion?
I would say the thing that pulls me into doing this,
Mhm.
and this really starts from, that little boy,
Mhm.
is that just from what I grew up with my grandfather, with my dad, with my parents, I've always had um, I feel like I've always had an empathy for human beings.
Right.
That's the thing that really drives me more than anything else, is that I really, appreciate and love people and to help people. I mean, I'll never forget that, with my dad, with that lady that had her leg blown off, and she was standing up, toasting him in tears, to thank him for helping her get prosthetics
Mhm.
for her life. And that, I mean, 8-year-old boy seeing that left such a strong impression.
Right.
And, we just knew her as Miss Shelley. And Miss Shelley used to call my dad every year to thank him. Every year she would
Yeah.
call him, like, religiously. And in fact, well, I don't want to get too emotional about that, but the day he died, she called, and I answered the phone.
Wow.
And so um, she didn't know he died. Just by the
She happened
grace
to.
of the universe, she had happened to call that day, and I'd never spoken to her. I just knew her as Miss Shelley, and she told me who she
That
was.
was the
She's
first time you spoke
first
to her.
time I've ever
Wow.
spoken to her since I saw her when I was an 8-year-old boy.
Wow.
I'd heard my mom told me Miss Shelley would call, and so I answered the phone, and she told me who she was, and she was moved down to Florida then, and I later learned she came back to the Seattle area. But yeah, she called my dad. So yeah, when you can do something in your life to make a living, but also
Mm.
help somebody in such a way that changes their life, when they've been through such a tragic situation. Like, I can't imagine a better
Right.
thing to do in life than that.
Yeah, it's like you're a superhero or a guardian angel, right?
It feels that. I mean,
Mhm.
you do have that sense that you can really make a difference in somebody's life. And I've had those, same situations. I mean, in my case, I mean, obviously this family here in San Francisco from Nepal. I
Mhm.
mean, we went out to dinner with them, and it was the same feeling as I had when I was 8 years old,
Wow.
to help them. I had another case. Rene Hernandez was a case I had about 10 years ago, and ironically, he was a college soccer player, and he got hit on the 605 freeway and, suffered a massive brain injury. And he was basically, his parents were told, and his family, just donate his organs. He's not going to live. And so he survived, and his uh, wife at the time, ironically, delivered their second child in the same hospital, LA County USC, where he was in a coma. And so to have this situation where you could represent somebody that survived such an accident, that they were telling him to just donate his organs, now to see him, he's alive. Yes, he's brain injured. He, walks with a walker or cane. But that was over 10 years ago, and I've remained friends with Renee
Mm.
since that day. And we've gone to LA Galaxy games together, and I've taken him to see, he's from Mexico. I've taken him to see the Mexican national team at the Rose Bowl, and so, those are special bonds that you develop
Right.
with your clients.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, my final question, and with this we wrap up. Briefly, what do you like your legacy to be? TBW. What would be, if I had to ask you a question, what would be your
Boy, I
phrase
hadn't
there?
hadn't really thought about that. Um, I want to keep on doing this for another 20
Fair
years.
enough.
So I
You have
don't,
a bunch of
I
years
don't,
ahead of
I
you.
don't know if I've thought about that question so much,
Mhm.
but I mean, I would say just along the lines of what I said. I
Yeah.
mean, if I have a legacy that that I help people along the
Mm.
way in
Yeah.
my life,
Great.
yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That was great.
Okay.
And that's a wrap on today's episode of Legal Latitudes. If you made it this far, you already know. The legal system affects all of us, whether you've been in an accident, know someone who has, or just want to understand how the law actually works in the real world. This show exists for you. If you got something out of today's episode, please take 10 seconds and leave us a 5-star review. It may sound small, but it genuinely helps more people find the show. And the more people who understand their rights, the better. And if something we discussed today made you think of someone, a friend, a family member, a colleague, send it to them. You never know when this kind of information matters to change someone's life. I am Federico Lathrop. Thank you for listening to Legal Latitudes, and I'll see you on the next one.